Do you know what it feels like to be built for greatness, to be born with an elegance that promises victory, only to be betrayed by the very era you were meant to conquer? I was France's great hope, their sleek twin-engine champion, the Potez 63, and by the summer of 1940, I was nothing more than a ghost, a forgotten falcon staggering through the twilight of a collapsing nation, a symbol of a dream that died before the fight even began. Was I fundamentally flawed, or was the machine of bureaucracy and indecision simply too heavy for my wings to lift? Was my failure inevitable, or was I a victim of a French tragedy written in delays and weak horsepower? I want you to look at my story, the story of my brothers and me, and tell me honestly, when everything you were designed to do becomes obsolete overnight, what is the moral responsibility of those who designed you? I am the Potez 63, and this is the story of how I flew beautifully, but died 1,000 frustrating deaths. My story began not with a roar but with a blueprint, born of a French Air Ministry specification in 1934. They called for a multi-place léger de défense, a light multi-seat defense aircraft, a single airframe that could do everything, a 3-seat fighter direction craft, a 2-seat bomber escort, and a 2-seat night fighter, a Swiss Army knife of the skies. They wanted a top speed of 450 kilometers per hour, a reasonable range, and the maneuverability of a single-seat fighter. It was an ambitious, almost utopian demand, a design brief that seemed to capture the very essence of French pre-war confidence: stylish, innovative, and slightly overcomplicated. The task fell to the great Henry Potez, and he and his team responded with a masterpiece of aerodynamic form. When I first rolled out in the guise of the Potez 630 prototype, I was a vision. My streamlined fuselage, the graceful low-mounted wings, the distinctive twin-tail unit. I was the very image of a modern, fast machine. The long greenhouse canopy that housed my crew, pilot, observer, and rear gunner, offered unparalleled visibility. I was elegant, sleek, and critically, I was fast to manufacture, requiring about half the man-hours of some of my single-engine counterparts. Everyone, from the engineers to the pilots who first flew me, felt the spark. We were going to be the answer. We were the future of French air power, but a machine is only as good as the heart that beats inside its chest, and for me the first blow came from my own engines. The initial 630 was powered by 2 Hispano-Suiza 14 radial engines, and they were, frankly, an absolute disaster. They overheated, they were unreliable, and they simply didn't deliver the power I needed. I flew well, yes, my handling was superb, a genuine joy in the air, but I was slow. The pilots loved my light controls and responsive turning, but speed is life in a dogfight, and I was being throttled before I even left the ground. We quickly switched to the Potez 631, the variant that would see the most combat, equipping me with the Gnome-Rhône 14M engines. They were better, yes, a slight increase in horsepower to around 708 p each, but they were still underpowered for a heavy fighter, especially one that was getting heavier with every new specification and added piece of equipment. In the late 1930s, when the Messerschmitt Bf-110, my direct German counterpart, the machine I was meant to counter, was screaming through the skies, I was lagging behind. My destiny as a high-speed interceptor was being choked by a lack of muscle. The tragedy was compounded by the fact that the French Air Force, through a series of bureaucratic reshuffles and a lack of decisive focus, had ordered me in staggering numbers, not just as a fighter, the 631, but as a reconnaissance aircraft, 6311, a light bomber, 633, and a command aircraft, 637. I was everywhere, filling every gap, becoming the most numerous modern aircraft in the Armée de l'Air. I was the stopgap, the all-rounder, and in doing so, I became master of nothing. I remember the phony war vividly, the eerie quiet between September 1939 and May 1940. I was flying my long, monotonous reconnaissance patrols, the Potez 63.11 variant with its ugly, distended glass nose where the observer lay prone, peering down at the static lines of the Maginot. We were the eyes of the army, and my crews, men like Lieutenant Paul Leconte, a young pilot with a permanent worried crease in his brow, would fly for hours. The hum of the Gnome-Rhône's a constant, uneasy lullaby. We'd see the occasional German reconnaissance plane, but mostly it was just tension. Yet even in that quiet, the problems were mounting. My engines, while reliable enough, were still underpowered, and the armament, while formidable on paper, 2 20mm cannons and 6 7.5mm machine guns on the improved 631 fighter variant, was often crippled by poor sights, unreliable feed mechanisms, and, most critically, a lack of cohesive doctrine. The French Air Force was still thinking in terms of World War I, of slow, methodical command, while across the border, the Luftwaffe was building its force on speed, aggression, and the coordinated Blitzkrieg. We were the beautiful forgotten falcon, waiting for a hunt that had already been redefined. Then came May 10th, 1940. The dam burst. Everything I was supposed to be, was thrown into a maelstrom of speed and fire. The Blitzkrieg was a blur, a hurricane that hit us with a ferocity no one in the high command truly understood. I was supposed to be the fighter director, coordinating the fast single-seat Moranes and Dewoitines, but the radio equipment was poor, the communication doctrine non-existent, and the speed differential between us and the German fighters was lethal. I wasn't an escort. I was a target. The men who flew me were brave, fiercely so. I remember a Potez 631 night fighter crew from GCNI 13 managing to shoot down a Heinkel He-111 bomber over the front lines. A flicker of victory. A moment where the promise of my design seemed to hold true. But for every success, there were 3 tragedies. My sleek twin-engine profile, which I was so proud of, was a curse. From a distance, in the confusion of a chaotic air battle, I bore a terrifying resemblance to the German Messerschmitt Bf-110. The result? We were attacked by our own side. Friendly fire incidents were horrific. French single-seaters would pounce on us, mistaking me for the enemy. Anti-aircraft units, their gunners desperate and jumpy, would fire on sight. The Air Ministry was forced to order huge 5-meter-long white recognition stripes to be painted on our fuselages. A desperate, humiliating attempt to keep us safe from the very forces we were meant to protect. It was a searing indictment of the chaos and a brutal irony that my shape, my elegance, was a fatal vulnerability. I flew the reconnaissance missions daily. Day after bloody day, the 6311 was thrown into the fray not just as a scout, but as a desperately needed light attack aircraft. The crews would descend low, through storms of flak, their eyes glued to the earth, trying to spot the relentless German armored columns pushing through the Ardennes. The information they brought back was invaluable, often the only coherent intelligence the reeling French army received. But my lack of speed was a death sentence. The Messerschmitt Bf-109s, the lean, screaming killers of the Luftwaffe, would drop on us from above with terrifying swiftness. We couldn't outrun them, and while my maneuverability was better than a Bf-110, I could not outfight a Bf-109. The losses were sickening. I watched my sister ships, the elegant twin-engined beauties, simply explode, torn apart by cannon fire, their 3-man crews gone in a puff of smoke and twisted metal. It wasn't the German bombers we were meant to intercept that were killing us. It was the relentless, faster German fighters. My crews were fighting a war where the deck was stacked against them from the moment they started their engines. They were fighting against time, against the technological advantage, and against their own obsolescence. I could feel the despair of the pilots, the sheer terror of the gunners in the rear turret, desperately trying to fend off a hunter that was simply too fast, too powerful. The promise of 1934 had dissolved into the brutal reality of 1940. So that's the situation I was in. I was the most numerous, most relied upon modern aircraft in the French Air Force. Yet I was technically obsolete, fatally vulnerable to friendly fire, and utterly betrayed by a flawed, drawn-out procurement process that favored quantity and versatility over decisive, overwhelming quality. The high command knew my limitations, yet they kept pushing me and my crews into the meat grinder, because they had nothing else. I had to face the Bf-109s with engines that should have been retired a year ago, with poor radios, and with the shadow of national collapse growing beneath my wings. Now, before I tell you about the final, heartbreaking days of the Battle of France and the strange quiet afterlife I had, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes, or rather, in the shoes of the French Air Force High Command. Knowing they had nothing better ready, but knowing I was a death trap, would you have grounded me and accepted total blindness? Or would you have kept sending my brave crews up to fight the inevitable? What is the right call when every choice leads to a tragedy? The climax, as it were, wasn't a single battle, but a frantic southbound retreat, a slow, agonizing dissipation. By mid-June, the German advance was unstoppable. The fighter groups flying me were falling back base by base, fueling what they could, leaving wrecks and unusable airframes behind. The Battle of France was a battle of attrition that we simply could not win. The final heartbreaking moment for me came on June 25, 1940, with the signing of the armistice. Overnight, the fighting stopped, and the sky that had been a torrent of fire became silent, heavy with the dust of defeat. My crews, the young men who had risked everything, were heartbroken. I was grounded, frozen in place. The inventory counted over 1,000 of the Potez 63 series that had been built, making me, even in defeat, the most numerous aircraft France had produced in the pre-war years. But what did that number mean now? It only signified the scale of the commitment to a flawed vision. The aftermath was a strange, humiliating epilogue. In the South, the Vichy French Air Force inherited a significant number of us. We were relegated to mundane tasks, training, transport, and the occasional patrol over the African colonies, a shadow of the heavy fighter I was designed to be. I was painted in the dull collaborationist markings, a further symbol of national shame and compromise. It was a slow, quiet death, not a dramatic blaze of glory, but a suffocating bureaucratic surrender. But the final twist, the true sting of my legacy, was that the Germans actually saw value in my sleek airframe, if not my performance. When they occupied the Vichy zone in 1942, they seized many of my remaining sister ships and used them. The Luftwaffe, the enemy I was meant to destroy, turned me into a transport, a liaison aircraft, a target tug for their own pilots to practice on. The elegant Falcon of France became the janitor of the Reich. Some even found their way to the air forces of German allies like Romania. The Potez 63, the multi-place léger that was supposed to save France, ended its life in the hands of its conquerors, its robust, easy-to-manufacture structure proving useful long after its fighting days were over. The design wasn't bad. It was good, too good for the weak engines and indecisive leadership it was saddled with. I was the airplane that was too early to be an effective twin-engine heavy fighter, and too late to be an acceptable pre-war stopgap. My end was not with a bang, but with the quiet, ignominious sound of a German ground crew starting my engines for a training flight. It was the ultimate crushing irony. My story, the story of France's forgotten Falcon, is the perfect metaphor for the collapse of France in 1940. It wasn't a collapse of bravery. It was a collapse of planning, of doctrine, of decisive action. I was a bird with clipped wings sent to fight eagles. My existence is a long, sad reminder of a beautiful design, betrayed by the relentless march of time, and the catastrophic failure to invest in true power. We must remember the Potez 63, not as a failure of engineering, but as a monument to the dangers of versatility over specialization, and the fatal consequences of sending brave men to fight a modern war with yesterday's engines. Like this video if you feel the sting of this lost potential. If you were on the side of the brave Potez crews, subscribe for more stories like mine, stories of the beautiful forgotten machines that history left behind. And please share your final thoughts on this whole mess, on the fine line between elegance and obsolescence in the comments section below. I'll see you all in the next story.